Hello, Shamai, and welcome to this very quick tactics video. I know the title says Best FM18 Tactic, and this is the best tactic that I have found to have worked for me. Now, I've done this with Everton, and the results aren't as if like I've won every single game, but for an Everton team and team are not expected to be top of the Premier League, things have gone very well. So I'm just going to go through the tactic, obviously the basics of the formation, the player roles, and how there can be little tweaks here and there. So the formation that we've got is a 4-3-1-2 narrow. I used to be a guy who really likes playing with wingers in Football Manager, and I used to hate playing narrow formations. But towards the end of FM17, I started to experiment with a little bit more narrow play, and something that kind of worked for me towards the end of FM17 and has really worked for me so far in FM18. So if you're struggling so far and you've really struggled, because I know there's quite a few people who are struggling with tactics so far and are struggling to get the results they need, then give this one a go and let me know down in the comments if you've tried it or what tactic you prefer and if this one has worked for you. So across the back then, we have got some pretty basic roles. Fullback, central defender, and fullback. I haven't really experimented with any of these so far. Just ignore the players in the positions because I've just played a cup match and completely rotated my squad. The players in the position for me right now doesn't matter because it's the players that you're going to be playing, and I'll just take you through a couple of the stats of the players that usually play in a second. Across the back, you can fiddle with this if you want. I mean, I don't think playing defenders or defensive centre backs is going to change that much, but fullbacks, I think you'll be okay as long as you don't put them as attacking wing backs. As long as they stay on either automatic, support, or defend, you should be okay because you need to keep your solid defensive unit. So as long as you don't try and commit your fullbacks forward, then you should be okay. Now we come in to the interesting bit. The really interesting bit is the midfield three. Why is it so interesting? Because it utilizes two of the new player roles in the midfield for Football Manager 18. We'll start with the simple one. In the middle, you're going to have a deep line playmaker on defend. This guy is going to be, well, obviously you need someone who can play there as a deep line playmaker. I've currently got Tom Davies there, but I'd usually play someone like Gylfi Sigurdsson. You need on defend particularly because you've got this player behind the striker here who's there to support your strikers, and your defense is going to need a little bit of covering. And this guy is there to kind of sit in front of the defense and help them out and obviously spread the play into midfield. Now, the first one we're going to talk about other than that in midfield is the Masala. Now, if I just read out what it says to you, it says, this is the modern interpretation of the Masala, a central player that likes to drift wide and operate in the half spaces. The Masala is essentially a central half winger who likes to do his defending slightly further up the field, although he does generally have less defensive responsibility. With the support duty, the Masala will seek to balance his responsibilities between more traditional midfield work and the inclination to contribute in the attacking third. So this is essentially going to be your midfielder that gets forward, your midfielder that bombs forward usually. Now, instead of having, I would advise that you put them on support because you don't want to commit too many of your midfielders to the attack essentially. And this is all about kind of playing a little bit defensively. This has got a lot of goals in it and it does tend to concede a fair amount of goals as well. But you don't want to be too risky in that midfield, and you want your Masala to be on support. Now the other side of midfield, you have the Calero, which I'm not going to read it all out this time because it's quite a lot to read and I don't want to fill you with boring stuff that you already know. It's essentially a box-to-box midfielder, but instead of going from box to box and getting up in attacks and getting right back in defense, it's kind of like an in-between, where they're going to be a link, basically a really good link between your defense and your attack, and they're going to play in between the spaces between your defense and attack. And it's really important to have these guys on support as well. I think you can only have it on support, so that's fine. So they're not going to bomb forward. So essentially what you're kind of limiting the amount of players that you commit to an attack, unless obviously you're behind and you need to commit a lot of players to attack for obvious reasons. So then behind the striker, you have an advanced playmaker. Now, I've kind of switching between advanced playmaker and shadow striker, and it all really depends on whether you're playing at home or whether you're playing away. And that's kind of, there's a couple of tweaks that I'll mention in team instructions now when you're playing away and when you're playing at home. So at home, I'd like to play as a shadow striker, and away I'd keep them as an advanced playmaker on support to try and keep them back a little bit and help out the midfield when you're away from home. But at home, and essentially when you're not the underdog, you should be playing him as a shadow striker, which I'll just switch now just to let you know, essentially. And then the two strikers, again, you can make a little tweaks here if you feel necessary. But the way I like to play it is a target man on support and a complete forward on attack as well. If you don't have someone who can play as a target man, then a deep lying forward or maybe sometimes a defensive forward on support can play this role. But it's really good to have a target man, someone up there who essentially is going to bring the ball down and try and release your complete forward. And obviously the most important player in that attack is going to be your complete forward. So if you're looking to spend money on either striker, you definitely want to commit on your complete forward. So what I've got this set up for now is the home matches. So on home, I'd have basically matches that you're not going to be the underdog. I'd have the mentality on control, and if we take a flexible team shape as well, and if we take a look, this is what we have for our team instructions. So everything is normal over here with tempo, time wasting, and width, and defensive line is the same as well. I'd like it to have both prevent short goalkeeper distribution to make sure you're not letting the goalkeeper pick out his passes, and use tighter marking, again, applying that pressure. And we also want more closing down as well. We want that high intensity up in their faces so we can win the ball back high up the field, especially with your Masala when they're up there. And it says they like to do the defending higher up the pitch. So if you've got used tighter marking and more closing down, you can win at the ball fairly high up the pitch and try and basically do your defending up front. On the build-up, I like to exploit the middle. Like I said, it's a very, very narrow formation. And so obviously you can't really exploit the wings. And that is where the weakness comes on this. But as long as your fullbacks don't commit themselves forward too often, then you should be okay defensively. And you just got to have good players with good passing stats to make sure you can exploit the middle. I like to have pass into space as well, because you've got the Masala who can play out wide. You've got the complete forward who's going to drift out wide and can always see those gaps. And so if you want to do the pass into spaces, then you can make the most of these players, especially as well the shadow striker, because they're all going to be making really, really good incisive runs if you've got those type of players. When you're playing at home, I also like to keep retained possession on, because it's always important to keep the ball when you're at home. And because in your midfield three, ideally you'll have three players who have really good passing. If worse comes to worse, you just have to pass the ball about in midfield for a little bit just to hold on to it and make sure that you don't play any risky passes essentially in your own half. That's what that's to do with. Be more expressive, again, is a lot more to do with the attacking players. Defensively, this tactic is very, very simple. But up front, you want it to be more expressive. You want to be passing the ball very neatly. This plays in where they pass it into space as well. And a couple of things here, you've got the stick to positions it's a little bit oxymoronic, because the stick to positions is kind of to talk to your defenders. But then if you click on like the individual instructions of your complete forward, your target man, your Masala, you can tell them to kind of have a little bit more freedom to run around. So this is kind of a general thing, but it kind of only applies to your defenders really. And then the running at defense is obviously you've got your Carolero and your Masala, and they're the guys who are going to be your big runners in midfield who you expect to run at the defense, as well as obviously your strikers up front. So now when you're playing away from home, there's really, really little difference. In player roles, the only difference is, like I said, you'd be playing, the guy behind the striker will be playing as an advanced playmaker instead of a shadow striker. I'd like to keep the mentality on counter, and I do try to keep the team shape on flexible as much as possible. And now if we come to the team instructions, very, very little changes here. A couple of things swapped around. We take off retain possession, because when you're away from home, essentially when you're the underdog, this tactic is for, not necessarily when you're away from home, because you can still be favourites when you're away. We want to take off retain possession because we want passing with purpose. We want every time you get the ball, you want to be running up the pitch, you want to be passing with purpose, and you don't want to make passes for the sake of it. And taking out retain possession means that you're a lot more likely to play those risky passes and those defense splitting passes. The only other change then is we switch from be more expressive to be more disciplined. Now this is basically going to stop your players getting a bit too carried away, a bit too out of shape. And obviously, when you're going to be defending a lot of games, it means that your Carolero and your Masala aren't going to drift into stupid positions and get caught essentially on the counter attack. Be more disciplined is just to keep you there and to make sure essentially you're not too naive and you don't expose yourself. Now, that's the tactic covered, and you all want to know about results. And like I said, you got to take this with a pinch of salt because it's with Everton, and you're not really expected to be top of the league. So we'll ignore the friendlies because they're just friendlies. And as you can see, we've only lost 3 games. One of them was the first game against Burnby at home. Unfortunately, that was a really disappointing one. We lost 3-2 to Arsenal, and we lost 3-0 to Chelsea. So that 3-0 to Chelsea is the only game where we've really come up short and not played very well. And there are some big teams that we've beaten. We've beaten Liverpool as well, and we've drawn against Man United. So we have played quite a few of the big teams, and we've only lost 2 of those games against the big teams. And you can see here, we're in a fantastic run of form here, beating Konyaspor 4-0, then Liverpool 4-3, then Stoke 1-0, Newcastle 1-0, and Konyaspor 2-0. We've finally hit that run where our defence is actually paying off as well. And we've just go to competition. We're currently 6th in the Premier League after 10 games. And we go into more detail. We can see our goals scored and goals conceded. We've scored a lot of goals. We've scored the joint most goals in the Premier League. 25 goals in just 10 games. But the bad side, like I said, you do concede goals. And we've actually conceded joint second most in the league. So 22 goals. That is the problem. That's something that you can kind of maybe tweak yourself with the tactic. But it's so far, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter how they're worried about how they're doing so bad and people getting sacked. So this is just a video I put out because I found a tactic that works for me, and personally it's my best tactic. And a couple of player stats if you would like to see them. So we take a look at our goal scorers then. The usual players up front, we have Sandro on 11, Oumar Niasse on 11, and Moussa Dembele on 7. Those are our usual players up front, and that's where your goals are going to come from, because as you can see, it drops down to 3 then with Leighton Baines, and I think all of his goals are penalties, or maybe 2 of them are penalties. So you're going to have to rely a lot on your front two. That is something you've got to be careful with because of injuries as well. So it's a very fragile tactic, but if you manage to keep it nailed down and keep those 2 players up front in fit and ready to play for you, then this tactic should succeed. So I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. Please don't forget, if you have tried this tactic, let me know down in the comments if it worked for you. If you want to see more, obviously subscribe. And if you have any tips or comments, again, please leave a comment down below. I'll see you again.